The air smelled like new beginnings the day Rachel Miller picked up the keys to her first house. It wasn't much, a single-story ranch home on a quiet suburban street, but to her, it was the embodiment of freedom. The cracked walkway, peeling shutters, and faded siding didn't bother her. She saw potential, not decay. For the first time in her life, Rachel owned something no one could take from her. Or so she thought. After years of night shifts as a nurse, after every hour spent tending to strangers while saving pennies for herself, this house was her sanctuary. But she wanted more than four walls, she wanted transformation. Modern kitchen, open floor plan, bright walls, clean lines. The kind of home that reflected who she was becoming, not who she had been. So, like many first-time homeowners, she searched for a contractor, and that's where everything began. Bright build renovations looked perfect. A glossy website. Polished before and after photos. A slogan that read, "We build dreams, not just homes." Rachel was charmed by their professionalism, their confidence, and especially by their price. Their project manager Tom arrived with swagger and certainty. He wore a crisp shirt, drove a new truck, and carried a portfolio of stunning remodels. He told her they could handle everything: demolition, flooring, plumbing, even custom cabinets. His voice was smooth, reassuring, persuasive. He asked for half the project cost up front to secure materials, $25,000. It was almost all of her savings. But she told herself it would be worth it. Dreams cost money, and this one felt real. She signed the contract. He smiled, shook her hand, and promised to start next Monday. But Monday came and went. Then another week. Then another excuse. By the third week, the phone stopped ringing. Rachel drove to their listed office address, an empty building with a for lease sign on the door. That's when she realized they hadn't just delayed her project. They'd vanished with her money, her plans, and her trust. The walls of her home suddenly felt smaller, the silence heavier. It was more than a financial loss. It was personal. But what Tom didn't know, what no scammer could have known, was that Rachel Miller wasn't to someone who gave up easily. And what had started as a renovation project was about to turn into a crusade. Days turned into weeks, and the shock settled into fury. Rachel filed a police report, but the response was painfully familiar. Contractor fraud is civil, not criminal. You'll have to take them to court. Court. Paperwork. Waiting. None of it promised results. But Rachel wasn't wired to sit quietly. She began collecting every scrap of evidence she could find. The original contract, screenshots of the website, the emails, the receipts, all printed, dated, and labeled. She created folders on her computer, color-coded for each lead she uncovered. When she ran a reverse lookup on the company's phone number, she found something odd. The same number listed under 3 different business names, each claiming to be a licensed renovation firm. Her pulse quickened. She cross-checked their contractor license number through the city's online permit database. It came back as invalid. The more she searched, the more the illusion unraveled. Their logo was stolen from another company in Texas. Their team photos were stock images used on multiple scam websites. The glowing 5-star reviews were copied word for word across fake Google profiles. Rachel began mapping the connections. Fake names, fake addresses, fake identities. Every few months, Tom's operation dissolved one company and created another, each time under a new name. With a new website, always promising affordable luxury renovations, and they always required half up front. She wasn't the first victim. But she was determined to be the last. Rachel started posting her findings online. On neighborhood forums, contractor review sites, Facebook community groups, everywhere people might search for renovations. Her post title was simple but powerful: "The contractor who took my deposit and vanished." Within hours, the responses flooded in. People from other cities, other neighborhoods, each telling the same story, the same name, the same man. They hadn't just scammed her. They had scammed the city. And now the city was about to hear her. Once Rachel realized how deep the scam ran, she knew this wasn't just about revenge, it was about exposure. She started with permits. Every legitimate contractor was required by law to pull them before starting work. Rachel called the city's building department, her voice steady but tight. She explained the situation, naming Bright-Build Renovations and their aliases. The clerk sighed. "We've had complaints about that company," he admitted quietly. "They never file permits. It's like they appear and disappear every 6 months." Rachel offered her files, the evidence she'd compiled. The official paused, intrigued. No one had ever provided this much documentation before. She sent everything. The official promised to forward it to the enforcement division, but Rachel didn't stop there. She went deeper: public records, business registries, county filings. Each search revealed more layers. One shell company had been sued for fraud 5 years earlier. Another had unpaid liens for unpaid subcontractors. All connected to the same man, Tom Harris, and yet he still operated freely. Rachel began contacting journalists. She reached out to consumer protection shows, housing investigators, and online watchdogs. Most didn't respond. A few offered sympathy, but no coverage. Still, she persisted. She filed a complaint with the state licensing board. She attached over 100 pages of evidence. When she finally received confirmation of receipt, it felt like oxygen after drowning. Then came her next move: a website. Rachel built her own public database, listing every known alias of Tom's operation. She uploaded documents, permits, and reviews. Each scammer name cross-referenced with the real person behind it. At first, only a few people visited. But by the end of the week, thousands had. One homeowner reached out. "I saw your site just in time. I almost hired them." Rachel realized something profound. She wasn't powerless. Information was power. And she was turning the city against its own predators. As her website grew, so did her reach. More victims sent emails, scanned contracts, payment receipts, and screenshots. Rachel turned her home office into a war room. Walls were covered in flowcharts and sticky notes. Red string connected company names to phone numbers, addresses, and fake reviews. It looked like an investigator's lair, but that's exactly what she'd become. She traced one of Tom's new companies to an active job site across town. A neighbor had posted photos online: workers demolishing a kitchen, the same branded trucks she remembered. Rachel contacted the homeowner anonymously. 2 days later, the woman replied in tears. She had just paid a deposit to Bright-Build's new partner brand. Rachel connected her with the licensing board immediately. Hours later, the job site was shut down for operating without permits. The dominoes began to fall. Her website became the top search result for every one of Tom's fake company names. Anyone who Googled him saw her warnings first. Contractors started distancing themselves from his operation. Subcontractors refused to work with him. Suppliers began demanding upfront payment. Bit by bit, the empire of deceit began to crumble. Rachel filed small claim suits alongside other victims. Even if the court couldn't retrieve all the stolen money, every judgment added pressure. Each case attached to his name became another nail in the coffin of his reputation. And then came the biggest breakthrough yet. A construction inspector reached out to her privately. He'd seen her website. He had been following the investigation quietly and confirmed that Tom had been blacklisted from pulling new permits under any name. Rachel's data, her tireless nights of research, had directly caused it. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe. But the fight wasn't over. Because men like Tom didn't stop when cornered, they adapted. And he was about to fight back. The morning the letter arrived, Rachel almost didn't open it. It was thick, official-looking, marked with a law firm's seal. Inside was a cease and desist notice. Tom Harris, through his attorney, accused her of defamation and interference with business. He demanded she take down her website, remove her posts, and issue a public apology or face legal action. For a moment, her stomach dropped. The boldness was staggering. The man who stole from her was threatening her. But fear quickly turned to resolve. She gathered her documents, printed every record again, and walked into the local news station's lobby. She didn't ask this time, she demanded to be heard. Her evidence was undeniable. Her story airtight. And when the investigative reporter finally looked through her files, his eyes widened. "This isn't one case," he said. "It's a pattern." The story aired 2 weeks later. The contractor who vanished and the woman who exposed him. It showed Rachel's evidence. The forged licenses, the fake companies, the trail of victims. The news spread like wildfire. Other outlets picked it up. The city issued a full public warning, advising citizens not to engage with any business tied to Tom Harris. Within days, his remaining partners severed ties. His phone numbers were disconnected. Then came the moment Rachel never expected. The licensing board called her personally. The state attorney general's office had opened a fraud investigation based on her compiled reports. Her data had triggered it. What started as one woman's loss had become a citywide reckoning. Rachel wasn't a victim anymore. She was a force. And the people who once ignored her were now following her lead. Her fight was far from over, but for the first time she was winning. The news spread like wildfire. Within days of the broadcast, Rachel Miller's name was everywhere, not as a victim, but as a crusader. The woman who exposed the biggest contractor scam in the city's history. Her calm, factual explanation in the news interview backed by thick stacks of evidence captured the public's attention. She didn't sound like someone seeking revenge. She sounded like someone seeking justice. And people listened. The comment sections overflowed with anger toward the fraudulent contractors. Viewers began to share their own stories, their own receipts, their own disappointments. Homeowners across the state realized that what had happened to Rachel had also happened to them, different names, same tricks. The pressure grew quickly. City officials who had ignored complaints for years suddenly rushed to take action. The Department of Consumer Affairs opened a hotline specifically for contractor fraud victims. Local inspectors were ordered to cross-check every active permit in the system. Everywhere Rachel turned, she saw movement slow, bureaucratic, but real. Her quiet determination had shaken the system awake. But amidst that change, she remained cautious. Tom Harris was still out there. She knew his type, men who survived off deception, reinventing themselves with every new business name, every new target. He would lay low for now, waiting for the storm to pass. She couldn't let that happen. Rachel began working directly with investigators. Her website transformed from a public database into an official repository, assisting the fraud division with evidence and names. Every time she added a new lead, it felt like a small piece of power returning to her hands. And behind every record was a life, families who had lost their savings, retirees left with half-built homes, single parents like her who had trusted too easily. Rachel saw them all. She carried their stories as her own. The city might have been late to act, but now it was finally listening. And this time, it wouldn't forget. Success brought attention but also retaliation. Rachel's inbox began to fill with anonymous messages. Some threatened lawsuits. Others were filled with insults and accusations. One email read like a warning, "You don't know who you're dealing with." She knew it was intimidation, Tom's final weapon. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Instead, she turned it into fuel. The more they tried to silence her, the more she spoke. She wrote blog posts explaining how homeowners could check contractor licenses before paying deposits. She gave interviews to community podcasts and morning talk shows. Her voice became a guide for those too afraid to fight back. But as her reach grew, the pressure on the scammers intensified. Tom Harris's entire network began to collapse. His shell companies were flagged by financial institutions. His accounts were frozen for investigation. His trucks were repossessed after suppliers reported fraud. He was cornered and desperate. One night, a local reporter contacted Rachel with new information. Tom had tried to start another company under a woman's name this time, claiming she was the owner while he managed operations. But the city, alerted by Rachel's database, denied the permit instantly. The walls were closing in. Even so, Rachel knew she had to finish what she started. Exposing him wasn't enough. He had to face the law. So she gathered every document, every victim testimony, every receipt and bank record she could find. The file was over 300 pages long, a perfect picture of calculated deceit. She submitted it directly to the state attorney's office. And this time, the city didn't ignore her. Within weeks, the fraud task force launched an official criminal case. For the first time, the man who had vanished after stealing thousands from her was finally on record. And the system that once dismissed her as just another unlucky homeowner was now using her as their lead witness. The courthouse stood cold and gray against the pale morning sky when the trial began. Rachel sat quietly in the back, a small figure in a sea of suits and files, her calm presence radiating strength. She wasn't there to watch him fall out of vengeance. She was there to make sure justice didn't slip through the cracks again. The evidence spoke louder than words. Contract after contract appeared, fake names, falsified signatures, stolen license numbers. Victims testified, describing half-finished homes, fake invoices, and unanswered calls. Each story mirrored hers. And then came the documents she had compiled. Business filings, traced IP addresses, matching deposit accounts, overlapping permit applications. Her meticulous research painted a complete portrait of fraud. There was no escaping it. Tom Harris had no defense strong enough to counter truth. When the verdict came, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and theft, the courtroom fell silent. Rachel didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She simply exhaled, long and steady, as if releasing years of anger and exhaustion in one breath. Justice had finally arrived, not in a dramatic explosion, but in quiet inevitability. Tom was sentenced to years in prison and ordered to repay every victim. His assets were liquidated. The money didn't erase the damage, but it marked the end of his empire of lies. Outside, as the reporters swarmed the courthouse, the headlines wrote themselves. Homeowner exposes contractor scam ring leads to major conviction. The story wasn't just about a crime anymore. It was about a woman who had refused to stay silent. And though the cameras captured her face, Rachel's thoughts were already somewhere else, on the house that still waited, unrenovated but full of potential. Her battle had started with a dream home. And now, finally, she was ready to rebuild it. Tom's downfall sent ripples through the entire city. For months after his sentencing, authorities launched audits on hundreds of renovation companies, cross-checking their permits, license numbers, and client records. Many dissolved overnight, afraid of exposure. New laws were drafted requiring all contractors to register digital verification IDs before accepting deposits. Rachel's fight had triggered reform. But her story didn't end with punishment, it continued through prevention. She began volunteering with the city's homeowner education initiative, teaching others how to protect themselves from fraud. Her name became synonymous with resilience. People began to refer to her as the woman who made the city listen. Meanwhile, her own home slowly transformed. Piece by piece, room by room, she began to rebuild, this time with trusted, verified professionals. Every stroke of paint, every nail, every tile felt symbolic. It wasn't just about restoration, it was reclamation. The empty, half-finished house that had once symbolized defeat now glowed with warmth and light. Her home became more than a place. It became proof that even from deception, something stronger could rise. By the following spring, Rachel's life had come full circle. Her once broken home now stood as a testament to persistence. White walls gleamed in the sunlight, the kitchen shone with modern finishes, and the garden she once ignored now bloomed in full color. But more than the physical transformation, it was the silence that had changed. It no longer felt heavy, it felt earned. Rachel had found peace, not by forgetting, but by transforming her pain into purpose. She'd learned that revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the steady act of rebuilding while the world watches. News outlets still reached out occasionally, asking her to revisit the story for 1 year later specials. She declined most requests. Her focus was forward. Yet sometimes, when she checked her inbox, she found messages from strangers, people she'd never met, thanking her. "Because of your story," one wrote, "I caught a fake contractor before it was too late." Another said, "You saved us." Each message reminded her that her fight had reached far beyond her little home. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Her home no longer represented loss, it represented justice. Her city no longer represented bureaucracy, it represented change. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the noise of old pain and new beginnings, Rachel knew she'd built something lasting, something even stronger than walls or wood. She had built a movement. Epilogue. The echo of a name. Months later, the city launched a new online database for residents to verify contractors instantly. Its name, Project Bright Home. The system credited the idea to a local homeowner who turned her loss into reform. Rachel smiled when she saw it. She didn't need recognition. The legacy was enough. The same city that once ignored her had now built something inspired by her fight. The same home that once represented failure now stood as proof of transformation. Her story had begun with trust betrayed. But it ended with trust restored between one woman and a city she refused to give up on. And as she locked the door to her finished home one quiet evening, the golden light spilling through her windows, Rachel realized she had never truly lost anything. She had only rebuilt it stronger.